We have Colonel Joseforsky on virtual. He wasn't able to attend in person, but I think his level of experience and time is gonna take the concept of what IC is in the smart city. It's gonna elevate it because how his career has been focused on integrating technology and data into the warrior culture, mindset, and functionality. He's going to introduce himself, I'm sure, but Colonel Joseforsky is going to really bring it home for the concept of smart city and how do we push forward? How do we take the lessons learned in Afghanistan and Iraq and apply them to Atlanta, to Duluth, to Burlington, North Carolina? Colonel Joseforsky, I'll hand off to you.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate. Well, hopefully I can tie into what's been presented earlier today. So my plan is to spend about 15 to 20 minutes just providing some prepared remarks and then opening the floor for questions and comments. And I know I didn't get to hear the earlier briefs. I know what Bill was presenting. I got to see that. So yeah, if you can just help me tie in, what's been presented earlier today and what I'm going to present from a military perspective, and then we can have some discussion after the prepared remarks and hopefully tie it all together here on what's happening in the military environment compared to the commercial environment. So I want to thank Byteworks and the AFCEA Atlanta chapter for the invite to be the speaker at this event today. Specifically, I want to call out Bill Miles from Byteworks and Paul Wirtz, the president of Atlanta chapter of AFCEA, who both worked all the details for this. Also a shout out to Matt Scott and Joey Wensler for having Bill and I on the Bits and Bytes podcast. You both were great, and it was a lot of fun getting to talk to you about the information environment. So thank you for having me on the podcast as well. I know that's out there on LinkedIn. I saw the link there on the Byteworks LinkedIn page. I'm sorry that I was not able to be there in person and enjoy the camaraderie that comes along with this event. I'm getting ready to retire from the Marine Corps after 26 years of service. So some things changed at the last minute for me and some requirements that I needed to do prior to transitioning out of the military. I'm really bummed that I did not get to listen to the fireside chat and Ben's emergency management presentation. I think Mike also provided a presentation as well as Bill on data sharing and artificial intelligence. I do know several people in the room from Byteworks. We go back over 15 years where we were fielding the latest and greatest technology to the Marines in Iraq and the Horn of Africa. Gentlemen that are in the room, thank you for what you did during the time to support the Marines. That work had a lasting effect. And just so you know, we still have that equipment in our inventory today, 15 years later. So I get to see it every day out in my the back lot of the building that I work at in Great Lakes, Illinois. For a little bit about my background on myself, so you have a frame of reference for what I've done in the past. I spent the last 30 years in the military, 4 at the Naval Academy playing football, and 26 years in the Marine Corps. My job specialty has been in aviation command and control. This is the only trained job specialty in the Marine Corps in this type of field. I've worked in command and control centers for about 12 years of my career, where I was responsible to make recommendations on which aircraft could support various air and ground requirements. And I worked with the Army, Navy, and Air Force on control of aircraft and missiles. My current job right now is the commander of a reserve Marine Air Control Group near Chicago. I have about 300 active duty and 1,000 reserve Marines and sailors. The active duty Marines are responsible to train our reservists to be ready to augment the active duty force with aviation command and control capabilities at any given time. Prior to this, I was in the Pentagon within headquarters, Marine Corps, and plans, policies, and operations as the service planner and also as the Joint Staff branch head. I prepared the Commandant of the Marine Corps for meetings with the Chairman of Joint Chiefs and Secretary of Defense and handled all the information coming in from the Joint Staff to establish Marine Corps positions on various tasks. I spent a year at the Department of Homeland Security in 2017 and 2018 as the Joint Task Force Coordination Cell lead. I got to work with the Secretary and Deputy Under and Assistant Secretaries on how to effectively leverage the department's resources through collaboration across these 3 task forces to reduce transnational criminal activity. Finally, I spent 3 years in the operations directorate of U.S. Central Command in Tampa, Florida, as the command and control systems integration lead, where we established a new information network with our Middle Eastern partners. We worked cross-domain solutions to help share information from our secure network to the coalition networks. And this was the beginning of what is now known as the mission partner environment, which I'll mention a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, the gold event. I was asked to be here to discuss the topic of collaborative data through agnostic sensors that aggregated and synthesized with the potential for predictive analysis. I want to start off talking about the acronym receiving a lot of attention within the Department of Defense and industry, especially those in the field of data, automation, command, control, and communications. JADC2 is the acronym. It stands for Joint All-Domain Command and Control. I'll put a little picture up here for you to absorb. I know there's a lot going on this. I'm going to talk through this so you have a little bit of idea of what JADC2 actually means. It's in the eyes of a lot of people, it means something different. So I'll go through kind of what the JADC2 strategy states, which is providing a coherent approach for shaping future joint force command and control capabilities, is intended to produce the warfighting capability to sense, make sense, and act at all levels and phases of war across all domains and with partners to deliver information advantage at the speed of relevance. I know Bill mentioned a little bit of this earlier in his presentation, so I'll just continue to dig down a little bit into this so you have a good understanding of what this is. JADC2 transcends any single capability, platform, or system. It provides an opportunity to accelerate the implementation of needed technological advancement and doctrinal change in the way the joint force conducts command and control. JADC2 will enable the joint force to use increasing volumes of data, employ automation and artificial intelligence, and rely upon a secure and resilient infrastructure, and act inside an adversary's decision cycle. Successful implementation of this strategy requires a focused commitment throughout the Department of Defense. To this end, the JADC2 strategy articulates 3 guiding command and control functions, which I mentioned earlier, of sense, make sense, and act. And that is shown in the middle circle of the diagram, where you see those 3 words around the decision cycle. There are now 5 domains that the military operates in: air, land, sea, and 2 recent ones that may be the most important are space and cyber. You see those outlined on the far left there, and those domains that we focus on specifically in the military. Each of these domains has resident systems that produce data and information. You can see on the left under the what column that the 5 services, which now includes the Space Force, all have various systems in these 5 domains. Our goal is to bring all this sensing together into the decision cycle that you see in the middle of the screen. This is the observe and orient from the OODA loop that military strategist and retired Air Force Colonel John Boyd came up with. OODA is an acronym for observe, orient, decide, and act. Again, I think Bill showed you a picture of that earlier in his presentation, so you're a little bit familiar with that acronym. The decide in this diagram is the top part of the how column, where predictive analysis, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are shown. These capabilities help us make sense. I have to say that throughout my career, I had very little of these capabilities. We were great at sensing with our equipment, and deciding was done from processing all the data through the human mind and using experience and training to get to the act phase. The human mind will always be part of the making sense. However, we are in an information world now with serious threats from China and Russia. The Chinese are advancing so rapidly that we have no option but to leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning. We need to get to the right side of the diagram quicker than our adversaries shown on the right of the screen. We need to process information, have computers help us make sense of it, allow the human mind to make a decision, and then act quicker than our very capable adversary. You see at the bottom of the screen in the how column the warfighting network. JADC2 is not about the network only. And this diagram does a good job showing that JADC2 is about increasing volumes of data in various domains on multiple systems across military services with a secure and resilient infrastructure to get a decision to target, confuse, or prevent adversaries from taking action against us. Transitioning to an information topic that is military specific and not something necessarily seen on the commercial side. In the military, we have 4 security classification levels: unclassified, confidential, secret, and top secret. We have 3 US military networks to support these levels. Many of you are familiar with NIPRNet, which stands for Non-Classified Internet Protocol Router Network, CIPRNet, which is Secure Internet Protocol Router Network, and JWICS, which is a Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System where top secret information is handled. One of our biggest problems in the military is the challenge of moving information across these networks and understanding what information is available on each one of them. There are additional dilemmas we face at the top secret level where information is not available to everyone, which we call compartmentalized. In many instances, we have silos in our command centers, depending on what network you're predominantly working within. This could be looked at very similar to where first responders in our cities are operating on different frequencies, or each has their own network, and sharing across these organizations becomes very challenging. For security classification issues, cross-domain solutions provide technical means to assist with moving data from one network to another if approved through the use of a security classification guide and at the right classification level. Artificial intelligence gets very hard across security classification levels, but very helpful within a specific. As a decision maker, you want to sense on all the networks, make sense with various data from all security classification levels, and then act with the information gathered. In my aviation command and control community, we operate mostly on a secret network, or the CIPRNet. To make effective targeting decisions and understand the capabilities at our disposal, you need to leverage intelligence information at the top secret level. To be more effective against the future adversary, we are changing the concept of how we deploy ourselves from stovepipe agencies to multifunctional operation centers where aviation, ground, and intel more seamlessly support each other. And this was a recent evolution that we've gone through, specifically in the Marine Corps with the Commandant's efforts through Force Design 2030, which was really our entry into JADC2 and the overall DoD concept. This is an internal paradigm shift for us to align more closely with the JADC2 concept and to better integrate with the rest of the Joint Force. Ultimately, the Joint Force needs to work together and understand the broader scope of the adversary's actions. Our systems need to integrate across the Joint Force so we can act quicker than the adversary. And for those that, when I say Joint Force, for those that may not know what that means, that's all the services working together: the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Army, the Air Force, and Space Force, and in some cases, the Coast Guard. I will give you an example of where artificial intelligence can be leveraged in a Joint Force scenario. The Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Space Force are operating in the Pacific. Each service has sensors and detects multiple inbound aircraft approaching a critical location with high-value assets. Based on the Navy destroyer in the area, our Marine Corps ground-air oriented task radar, or known as the TPS-80, Air Force F-22's airborne, and the Army's Patriot surface-to-air missile system, a decision to engage those aircraft needs to be made within minutes. The Navy destroyer radar and Marine TPS-80 are picking up the threat. The Combined Force Air Component Commander delegated down to a regional air defense commander to make engagement decisions. That commander has to understand 3 things. 1, all assets available, such as the F-22s, the threat, such as the Chinese J-20s, and 3, ranges of friendly and enemy weapon systems, all within that minute. Now, to give you an idea of the difference between a Chinese J-20 and F-22s, we think the range of the Chinese J-20 is roughly 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers better than our aircraft. So understanding the threat that we're going against is absolutely critical. Artificial intelligence can significantly shorten that kill chain decision cycle and allow the commander to act before the enemy has time to strike our high value capabilities. The above scenario did not have any mention of other countries, and we will fight in the future with our partners. We obviously have significant challenges sharing information across the U.S. Joint Force. The complexity of collaborating with coalition partners ramps up the data sharing challenges significantly. When I was at U.S. Central Command in 2011 to 2014, I worked as I said earlier, in the operations directorate in the J3 and the command and control division. I had the opportunity to work across combatant commands. Combatant commands for us is we break the world down into regional sections. I was specifically at U.S. Central Command, which was responsible for the Middle East. But I also worked there with the Defense Information Systems Agency to stand up the Mission Partner Environment, or MPE, which I mentioned earlier in my presentation. This environment has cross-domain solutions located in Germany, where European Command is at, in Japan, where the Indo-Pacific Command is located, and Tampa, Florida, which is where I was at when I was stationed there at U.S. Central Command. The 3 main combatant commands for the Middle East, Europe, and Pacific each have a common cross-domain solution. MPE allows the dynamic change of sharing information by classification level with partners depending on who is working together with us against the threat. For example, we could share information with a US, Japan, and Australia partnership in the Pacific, while sharing information with the US, UK, Canada, and France partnership in Europe. If I go back to the goal of the event today to discuss collaborative data through agnostic sensors, then aggregated and synthesized with the potential for predictive analysis, now we can understand how in the military problem set, we will most certainly in the future need data from multiple sources, and for it to be aggregated and assessed with artificial intelligence and predictive analysis so we can act in a timely manner before our adversary. The military environment has the same goals as smart cities, to operate more efficiently through an informed environment. Bill, that picture there is for you, our days out in the Horn of Africa. Those SATCOM dishes are pointed straight up in the air there in Djibouti, Africa. So I want to close by saying that the industry relationship with the military is absolutely critical. We need to know what is in the realm of possible. I got to spend 3 years doing Marine Corps acquisition back in 2004 to 2007, which is where I met some of the people in the room today. While there, I learned that military acquisition actually is very difficult. There are tons of programs across each service, and each project officer is working specific requirements for their project or program. Developing capabilities that can interoperate not only with other systems in your own service, but also with the other services is very difficult. There are checks and balances in place, but this causes a lengthy development of product and significant time getting a field decision. As we look to gain more artificial intelligence and predictive analysis capabilities into our fielded systems, we need to ensure we can easily train service members how to use it and to continuously be able to update the algorithms based on the threat by our adversaries. I want to thank again Byteworks and Mr. Paul Wirtz, the president of the chapter of AFCEA, for having me speak today. It is an honor to be part of this day with you all, especially with the level of talent in the room there. I would like to open up the floor for questions or comments. I wanted just to kind of get a little bit of idea of what we're doing in the military to help, and then from what was presented earlier today to try to tie the two together. But I think the discussion that we can have together in the room and to help talk about the military environment and how it relates to what's being done with the smart cities and in our emergency management response. So Michael, if you can keep us on track with time, I'd appreciate that, but I'm going to come off sharing the screen.
Perfect. Yep, I was just
Okay.
going to ask you to do that. So guys, the colonel can see the room here through this board. He can certainly hear us now. So anybody that's got questions, we can fire away here. We've got plenty of time, Colonel, since we started you early. So no concern with that. If we get near time, then I'll let you know. But fire away. He can see the room on the board there.
First of all, how's it going, sir? Been a long time.
I can't see in the back there. Who is it?
It's James.
Oh, hey, James. Great to hear you. And it's been a long time. Thank you for everything you've done for us in the Marine Corps and really the military overall.
Certainly, my pleasure. My question, you mentioned using AI to help shorten the life cycle of initial event occurring and then deciding how to respond. What generally is the military's position on how much AI is going to influence that outcome? Because as we know, AI can be wrong, right? And actually factually incorrect about some things. How do you handle instances, making sure AI doesn't provide bad recommendations or intel?
Great question, Jim. I appreciate that. Yeah, when I was going through that, my prepared remarks, I was thinking about that. And I specifically put in the remarks about the human mind. And, I mentioned throughout my career that, that's what's been, the art of, in a sense, the artificial intelligence. But now we have the ability for computers to help us out and aid us in our decision making. So I think that we need the ability of artificial intelligence to help us act quicker. There's so much information coming in comparatively to when I started in the Marine Corps back 25 years ago. There's no way to keep up with the amount of stuff coming in that we're seeing. So when I sit in these command centers now, comparatively to 25 years ago, it's overwhelming, and it's hard to really understand everything that's there and available to you, especially as I talked about the complexity of the different classification levels, and being able to understand what's on each of those networks to help you make a decision. But what I'd like to have as a commander in one of these centers is I would want to have the ability for artificial intelligence to know what the threat is, to know what our capabilities are, to understand ranges of weapon systems or aircraft, also the any surface to air missiles that we may have at our disposal, and to help make recommendations on what we should do. Nothing's ever going to replace the experience that you have in the military. Nothing's ever going to replace you thinking as a decision maker. But certainly I would want the ability and the option to have the ability in my system to have some recommendations being made to me based on teaching the computer what we think it should provide us, with all the different military parameters. So definitely very aware that it can be wrong. If you remember back, Jim and Bill, I know you're in the room, you remember my call sign back when we were doing all the military acquisition. It was show me. So I want to see the data. I want to know what I want to know what the computer's thinking, but also, it's also about what we put into it to help understand what the dynamics of the situation are. So, but good question, Jim. Hopefully that addresses a little bit. I think that we're at a point now where we have to have this capability, or we're going to be behind, and because our adversaries are going to use it, and they're going to use it to their advantage to overwhelm us. So we're going to have to act much quicker than we did in the past.
Thank you.
Question here, Bill. Colonel, name's Dave Chapman. Could you give us a quick overview of the timeline for the JADC development and deployment? And is the intention to absorb legacy systems like DCGS or to replace those with fresh capability?
Yeah, I think JADC2 is, what was your name again, sir? I'm sorry.
What's your name?
Dave Chapman.
Dave? Dave, good question. Thank you. Appreciate it. I can't give you a timeline because I don't think there is one. I think JADC2 is going to be continuous. It's happening right now. We're getting better at what we do as a joint force and how we collaborate, how we procure equipment, and how it interoperates. So, JADC2 is not necessarily, one thing. It's not one system. It's multiple systems. It's multiple projects. It's the, the backbone transport. It's our sensors. It's our ability to gather intel. So SIGINT, HUMINT, you name it, we can, whatever we're collecting, that's part of the JADC2 concept. So DCGS, I mean, that's a capability, obviously is helping us gather intel, especially in the top secret realm. Those systems that are within each of those security classification levels are absolutely critical for us to be able to process all that information in and to be able to make timely decisions. So I just, one thing I want to make sure I leave you all with is that, JADC2 is ongoing right now. It's happening. We're doing it in the military currently with what we have. So I think as we get into the 2030 timeframe, we're looking for more capabilities for industry in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and predictive analysis to help us get more efficient and better. But as I said before, when we start looking at individual systems procured throughout the services, we have to have this type of capability built into it, because AI in itself, we're investing a lot of money in across the Department of Defense right now, especially in the concept from an Office of Secretary of Defense level. But it ultimately boils down to what each service is doing to leverage these capabilities. And then as we deploy ourselves, into a specific area of operation, the Marine Corps is not going out there alone in the Pacific. We're going to be out there, and we're going to be relying on the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and Space Force to all work together in order to accomplish the mission that component commander will have, or the Joint Force component commander will have when we're out there. As an example in the Pacific of that area of operation. So I know I probably didn't answer your question quite specifically, but I kind of going to give you an honest answer of where we think this is at. JADC2 concept is kind of new in DoD. When I was there in the Pentagon, the strategy was being developed. It was, the strategy is only a couple years old. So it's really the military's best effort at trying to make sure that we, as a U.S. military, are working together, are being interoperable, and making sure that we hold ourselves to certain standards when we acquire equipment. But we also have to keep in mind the coalition part of this to make sure that we work with our coalition partners, we exercise with them and train with them in order to be ready when we actually have to do this for real. So, Dave, I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Thank you, sir. Perfect.
My real question is, you talked about the Chinese and Russian threat. You also compared their J-20 warfighter with our F-22 warfighter. I know that in today's world, the simulation technology, we can really try to understand, and try to mitigate the risks of the war scenarios using simulation. So you see that the simulation and maybe developing, war games kind of scenarios and those kind of things can help mitigate those risks. And then the second question is, what do you see the role of small business helping these efforts of Air Force, our Joint Command and Space Force and all? Where do you see and how do you see the small business? Because all we see is really majority of the time it's all big companies, GE, Northrop, and those guys. How can small business help and support those kind of efforts?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. It's some good questions. Let me do my best to address the the first one on the J-20 and F-22, and then now that example I gave earlier, simulation is absolutely critical. We're doing it now. We're wargaming different scenarios now across each service is doing it, but we're also doing it together as a joint force. We will not be effective in a real war situation without conducting simulation. So this is an area that, you know, I know specifically in the Marine Corps, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on, and I know each of the other services are also doing this as well. So when I was at the Pentagon and you know, and representing the Marine Corps with all the joint staff interactions, there was an exercise, a globally integrated exercise, GIE, that we conducted, led by the joint staff, but executed by each of the combatant commands. So it was basically, you know, a simulated exercise that, you know, would happen where, you know, if something happens with China and there's some type of conflict, you know, that's no longer centered in just Asia and the Pacific. You know, that is now transcending across the world. And when we think about air, sea, and land, it's across the world in those three domains. But space and cyber now it has no boundaries. So, you know, that's another area that we're doing a lot of work in, because we may never get to the point where we're firing missiles. We may be fighting in cyber for weeks and months. We're doing it right now, actually. So, you know, it's not necessarily something that everybody sees, but we're competing in cyber, we're competing in space right now with the Chinese, and we're doing our simulated efforts within the Department of Defense on how we would handle these types of things across the world, across how we break down the combatant commands, as well as how cybercom and spacecom are involved in this with each of the geographic combatant commands. Because again, cybercom and spacecom have no boundaries. So that's what we're trying to work through, is how do we handle conflict before we start firing weapons. And really, weapons now is not necessarily a missile or a bullet, or, you know, an aircraft firing a missile. You know, that it's now information. It's now what you can do via cyber means, in, you know, taking down power grids, or, you know, affecting the adversary's ability to do something militarily before they can even deploy themselves. So hopefully that answers a little bit on your first question. We are definitely doing simulation and wargaming constantly, because we can't do all that, what we want to do, you know, live and in person all the time. We do a lot of live exercises with these types of scenarios that we wargame, but what we do is take the wargaming and the simulation, and we take all those lessons learned and we bring them into an actual exercise to make sure that we understand how to collaborate better, understand how to use our resources better, and to ensure that we are put in a stressful environment. We have to train in stressful environments, and that helps us through the simulation and leading into the actual live exercises. That actually helps us feel kind of that pressure and what's needed to do in an actual situation. So hopefully that helps answer that first question about simulation. The second one was did that help answer the first one?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Role of small business. So I have a lot of experience on this, because I did DoD acquisition for 3 years within the Marine Corps. And I was heavily involved in roughly about $400 million in contracting efforts through the height of the Operation Iraqi Freedom. So we were doing projects in 60 to 90 days, fielding equipment out to Iraq and Horn of Africa. And we eventually, took all that work that we were doing and turned it into a program of record, where we did the major contract to be able to field satellite communications and networking and wireless equipment all throughout the whole Marine Corps. Back in 2003 and 4, we had probably about 40 satellite communication systems in the Marine Corps. Today we have 150 plus, probably upward of 200, where we've increased the ability to have communication anywhere we go in the world, and have it at different types of packages depending on where we go and different sizes. So I did contracting through contract vehicles that were probably considered small business. I've done contracting through contract vehicles that were large or big business. So I think the role of the small business is absolutely critical. I think that the ability for small businesses to help some of the larger companies, which some of the things I talked about in my presentation, with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, predictive analysis, those types of things, small companies can really help some of these large companies as we put these types of capabilities on contract. What I would expect is that these types of capabilities are embedded into the systems that we procure, and maybe the big companies are the ones doing kind of that bigger integration. But what I found, in my acquisition time, is that the small companies are ones that really made the biggest difference, because there's a lot of innovation, a lot of creative thinking. There's a lot of energy within small business, and and there's less bureaucracy. So I think that we, I would encourage those in the room that are in the small business community to really continue to push the envelope on these types of capabilities that we're talking about today. And if there's no ability for you to be able to contract directly with the government, then to work through some of the companies that actually are on contract and can directly contract with the government. So that's just a little bit of my experience from before, but to take it up to to today, 15 years later, I think the small business community is absolutely essential to what we do within DoD and helping some of these bigger companies navigate some of these really hard problem sets that we're dealing with. Does that help, sir?
Yes, thank you.
So keep going, keep pushing the envelope.
Any other questions in the room again? Go ahead.
Sir, Tim Brown. I heard you say earlier that you have some background in cross-domain solutions. I'm curious if you think there's a way for CDS to be AI enabled that might help you to transition classified information down to lower classification, and also to meet those goals across each of the joint areas, Army, Navy, Air Force, cyber, space. I'm just curious if you think there might be a process or a path forward for cross-domain solutions to be AI enabled that might be able to help that.
Yeah, great question. I stayed away from that topic in my comments earlier because I didn't want to get into that level of complexity. I think there is, and I thank you for asking that question. When I was at CENTCOM, I watched what we needed to do in order to take our sensor data from various sources. It was ground radars, airborne aircraft, the Navy destroyer, various ground units, and I got to see what it actually took to take that, what we considered secret, no foreign data, put it through a cross-domain solution, and get to the other end to make sure that we can actually share it with certain coalition partners. It was really time consuming and really kind of, when I think back about it, it was really kind of ridiculous on what we were doing manually to make sure that the rule sets were correct for the cross-domain solution. So I had, one of the people that worked for me, she was responsible to work with the foreign disclosure officer and also all the different services on the data that's being put out by those individual platforms, and to determine what information within that data set needed to be stripped in the cross-domain solution to get to the other side to be put on a coalition network that was then approved to be put at that classification level, whatever the network that it was being put on. You know, for example, in Afghanistan, we had Centrix ISAF, so we had to make decisions on what information we were going to put on that coalition network, where we had, you know, 20 plus countries involved in that coalition. So we had to, you know, kind of dummy the information down to that level, which takes a significant amount of work on the rule sets on the cross-domain solution to make sure that we did the right thing with that data. So I think the AI-enabled cross-domain solution, just looking at the multiple sources of information coming in, what we don't think we can share with our partners based on the security classification guide, if you can take those types of information and be able to produce a product, you know, within hours, vice, you know, us doing it over days and weeks, you know, I think that's helpful. And that was at the combatant command level. I think it's even more important as we talk about potentially putting cross-domain solutions down towards the tactical level, where we need the ability to do that, because we just don't have as much people trained on that type of knowledge to do that type of thing that we did, you know, at a major combatant command headquarters where I was at in Tampa, Florida. We had, you know, a lot of manpower, a lot of money, and a lot of expertise to deal with that. So we've kind of centralized it to the combatant command because of its complexity. But I think, to your point, I think the AI-enabled cross-domain solution would be absolutely a major breakthrough. You know, and we also, you know, that was just, you know, when I talked about that, that was specifically on kind of sensor data. You know, when I talked about the mission partner environment, it also has a different cross-domain solution. I think it's still called the trusted network environment, which the cross-domain solution that was within there, and that helped us basically do file sharing, imagery sharing, video, that type of thing, across, you know, from our CIPRNet network, for example, to some of the coalition networks around the world. But just that file sharing ability, and for that AI-enabled, you know, trusted network environment to understand, you know, what's allowed to go through based on kind of the tetragraphs of the classification of the information. You know, I think that would be tremendously useful as well, as we're moving forward. You know, that's, you know, we had to work through DISA and the DSOG working group in order to get approvals for these cross-domain solutions in the military, because they're the ones that are looking at the integrity of our secure networks to make sure we're not opening any holes. But I really think in that level, that would really be beneficial in you know, in helping us solve these types of problems. So hopefully that helps, Tim. A lot of information there to dissect, but I've spent, you know, 3-4 years of my life dealing specifically with this topic.
No, that answer was fantastic. Thank you.
All right, guys, we got time for one more question. One question online is kind of a follow-up to Tim, and he's asking, what does that process actually look like?
The process of
Analyzing the data. You know, what does it look like? You've got people sitting at desks, you've got data coming in. What is it really, you know, at that moment of decision making? What does it look like?
Yeah, so if I'm going to put myself in the shoes of, I'm sitting in a command center and having to make a decision, and I have multiple sources of information coming in. So when I say multiple sources, I'm talking about, you know, at every classification level that I mentioned earlier in my brief, with unclassified, secret, and top secret. You know, as part of our problem that we have, you know, is to understand what is on each of those networks. So usually you're presented with a problem when you're in a command center and you're set up and you need to make decisions. You're presented with a problem or a dilemma. That's the first thing that kind of kicks us off, and you have you know, certain information coming into you at any given time. Some decisions have to be made within minutes, some have to be made within hours, some have to be made in days. So it really depends on the time frame you're looking at in order to strike a target or to address a situation. So I think it will really depend on the time frame. I think it's more obvious when you're doing, you know, split kind of the minute by minute decisions. You know, I think it's a little bit more obvious. I'm going to use an example of an air tasking order to produce an air tasking order. I'm very familiar with this. We do it with the joint community. The Marine Corps does it with the joint community, and eventually we produce a joint air tasking order that basically articulates what asset is going to be used for what requirement in the next 24 hours. And then what we're also doing is we have another air tasking order cycle going for the 48-hour cycle, and then another one going for a 72-hour cycle. So what I like to be able to do in that situation is I would like to be able to have what aircraft that we have available to us. I would like to understand the target that we're trying to address, and doesn't necessarily have to be addressed with aviation, or could it be addressed with some other means, maybe a surface-to-surface missile. I'd also like to know what that threat is around the target. So if there are surface-to-air missile threats, so that helps me decide which type of package I have to put together, as far as do I have to suppress that, surface-to-air threat in order to go and strike the target. I need to know what the weaponeering is on that system that we're going to actually use. I need to know its distance. I need to know its standoff distance in order to strike the target, because the surface-to-air missile threat may be an issue in that range of the target. So all those different parameters we're assessing, at any given time, developing an air tasking order. And right now we're doing it in one of our command and control systems. But what we do is we literally bring about 15 to 20 people into a location that are all SMEs in their specific area. And then we figure out what the best way to handle these types of situations. And it's just not one, it's hundreds of these, things that we're trying to deal with all at one time. And it's hard. It's really hard to come up with the right solutions in an efficient manner. So that, that's just one thing where I'm in a command center, and I'm actually trying to write this thing, and I'm doing it manually. I'm literally sometimes in a spreadsheet, manually trying to figure out the timing, the timeline of the day, and the different assets, the different weaponeering, and the threats that are out there, because I'm pulling those threats in, at the top secret level from all the intel gathering that we're doing. So if we have the ability to try to use some of the artificial intelligence and machine learning in order to understand how we're doing that, that will definitely reduce down maybe the number of people I need. It may also allow us to do this in areas that are more secure. I can do it anywhere. I don't have to necessarily do it on the battlefield environment. I can do it what we consider in the rear. So that's kind of, I think, what I would use as a process of analyzing the data, trying to give you an example of what we actually do, when we actually have to go and do exercises or actual real world deployments. That's what we're kind of processing, and that's how we're analyzing the data. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Colonel. That's all the time of yours we're going to take. So guys, let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.